And we're live. So we're going to be talking with Werner Eriksen from Telenor. He gave a keynote presentation at TADSummit in November on building a programmable telco core network. And we have a lot of questions to run through, so I'm just going to get straight down to the questions. So Werner, your idea in creating a parallel MVNO for network experimentation is great. I think everybody at TADSummit was really excited about what you presented. I can see the truth of breaking out of business as usual. But what were some of the internal issues and barriers you faced in creating this experimental telco?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, basically, I think what you said about business as usual. So MVNO is a very loaded term in our industry. And when we suggested this to our sponsors and to our host MNO here in Norway, of course, they thought this is now yet another competitor that we're trying to build internally. And it took us a bit of time trying to explain that that was not the main goal for this. And actually, we ended up renaming the whole project from MVNO to Software Telco. And that helped a lot, actually, because then people understood that this is something different, or could think in those along those lines.
Interesting. So it was just a naming thing that got people. It must have been more than that. Come on.
Of course, there's more than that, but actually that was a big thing. MVNO, or if you're in a fierce competitive situation every day, yeah. MVNO spells out, competition, and all the natural reflexes will then immediately kick in, yep. And blur the image a bit. But of course, we also had the people being quite skeptic about, how come you think, as being us, a little group, you can compete with the traditional vendors of Telenor. How can you be better, faster than the traditional vendors? And that was also, of course, healthy skepticism about that. We're a small group trying to do something, and why hasn't this been done before by someone else? Mm-hmm. But I think the answer to that, and I think we managed to get through with that, is that we will actually aggressively try to do things completely differently if needed, focusing radically on the end user, and then if we need to.
Yep, no, I think that's a good point you raise on the traditional vendor acting as, and the existing vendor relationship with the telco, in terms of, well, we can do this with our existing vendor. Why do we need to do something different? And the problem is, breaking through that. When we're talking at the start about business as usual within a telco, we also have business as usual within the vendors as well. So I think both of those parties create quite a tough barrier to break through. So I think the 2 points you're raising in terms of just positioning it so it seemed less offensive, and then saying, let us take a different approach and show you by doing something that's more web-centric, perhaps, that we can do things differently. So I think that's good points. So moving on to the second question, what type of software developers did you recruit? Telco services are not really seen as cool or interesting to most developers. So a lot of interest. So this actually, there was about 4 or 5 questions that sort of combined into this one around what type of developers did you hire?
Okay, and that's an interesting question. Actually, most of the team members, they're not too interested in telco specific stuff at all. And I think that's the point I tried to make in the presentation too. Of course, you need the skill set to understand what's going on. Yeah. But basically, we are not about telco services. We are about communication services in general. The telco part of it is just, another tool, which hopefully can help us to create something which is not already done. So the people we recruit, they are, interested in making interesting stuff, and it just happens that this is something in our tool chest. So I think from that angle, it hasn't been a problem for us recruiting people that we wanted.
Exactly. Now, were they PHP developers? Was it Java? Was it sort of core real time? Was it UI? There was a lot of interest around the type of developers that you hired into this group.
Yeah. So we have a fairly diverse group, actually. We have some people that enjoy working on, the JavaScript and the front end and so on. Yeah. And then we have a few guys that are hardcore real-time communication services, been working in the voice over IP industry for years.
Gotcha.
So we have that specter of people in the group.
Yeah, so diversity. Diversity key.
Yeah.
Great. Jumping to a very technical question.
Okay.
Do you have a copy of Telenor's HLR HSS, or do you have a separate HLR HLS so the services are only addressable to your MVNO SIMs?
Yeah. So we are full stack MVNO, and that means you need to have your own HLR HSS, for instance,
Gotcha.
as well as SMSC and MSC, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we have our own SIM cards. And our services, therefore, will only be available to those SIM cards.
Gotcha. Understood. Cool. That was clear.
Yeah.
So do you have user experience and product people, not just developers? And if so, where did you hire them from?
Yeah, so in the early phase, this has been an engineering-heavy activity, getting the basic platform up and running. But we have been running one experiment with our sister company here in Norway, where they actually brought product and UX capacities into the project. Gotcha. And we provided a platform from where we stood. So it depends on the project and what we're doing.
Well, that's interesting. So partnering on the product and UX side rather than bringing that in-house. That's interesting.
Yeah. So the idea behind the platform we're setting up is it should be a group-wide asset. So all the different business units should be able to bring in projects into this. Mm-hmm. And depending on what they want to test out, they can also bring the right people and capacities into the project.
Gotcha. And I guess this is sort of linking back to the previous question a little bit. In some of the services that you create, if they're to run on existing Telenor, with existing Telenor customers, is that possible using the current setup, or is it solely for your SIMs?
Well, initially it will be for our SIMs, and then of course, depending on the form and shape of the service, it will be more or less difficult to integrate on the existing stack.
Yeah.
But my fear is and hope is that we will create some really interesting services utilizing something we built on our own, and then of course the question is, how do you actually put that back into this platform? And that is a question that we haven't really answered yet. So the main value at the moment is that we will bring a platform where the business units can test out new services much more lean and mean than they would otherwise be able to do, and how to implement it.
Gotcha. No, I think that in quite a few telcos I'm seeing at the moment that are taking a more, trying to bring service experimentation outside of the existing business. That remains the big question, how you bring it back. And you're right, it depends on the service. Some look at, what we do in the experimental, it scales, but it's only hundreds of thousands, it's not millions. When we bring it back, we need to re-architect for scalability or reliability so that it sort of gets eaten up within the existing organization that has its problems. Others say this has been created by a small group that understand and are being successful in this market. We just want to help them be successful across all our customer base, so they take more of a standoffish approach, not trying to let business as usual gobble up services while they're still in that awkward adolescence phase. There's some success, but they haven't achieved mass market. So that's I think a good point you raised there.
Yeah.
Then moving on to question 5. What are the top 3 open source frameworks in your experimental network?
Well, there's so many. I think I had a slide in the presentation just showing a lot of them. And it's like 10 or 20 different open source projects.
Yep.
Well, basically, we're trying to mimic and also take advantage of all the good things out there in the open source communities.
Exactly, yeah.
And hopefully be able to contribute something back.
Gotcha.
But I guess with this audience, I mentioned 3 that I also had on the slide. So the natural suspects, I would say, on the VoIP side for SIP infrastructure has been Camayo, which has been around for a long time. So that's kind of the shelf thing.
And has a very active community behind it, very dedicated community.
Exactly. And then, of course, a big thing in our setup has been the use of WebRTC. All right, so enabling new ways of connecting people to their phone numbers, etc., through the web browser has been a very important part of what we do. And also, of course, since we have a sister organization here that's competing with Google Hangouts, you know, the appear.in service, the natural thing for us to mention. And then finally, I could guess our friends at Telestax, we've been using some of their components for the SMSC, the USSD gateway, and also RESTCOM for the APIs, which are also mostly open source. So those are kind of, in this space, the most active things. And then we are using React on the front end, and we use, you know, so there's a lot of stuff that's been introduced and thrown out on a daily basis.
No, that's a very good point. And I was over in Japan last week, where Nicholas Blum from Google was presenting on WebRTC and where they're taking it. And it was really interesting to see some of the work they're doing on doing a lot of media processing at the edge with WebRTC. So that, I think, it really opens up some interesting angles. So, you know, even though it's still early days and WebRTC is very much a complementary technology that you use with a range of VoIP and more traditional communication services, I think that you know, over the next 5 years, it's, you know, it really is going to transform a lot of services and a lot of the thinking behind how we architect services as well. So that's good. So question 6, and this again came from a lot of telcos, and I think it was about 5 questions that sort of are condensed into this one. How do you get real users involved, and what internal barriers do you face?
Okay, I think that's a very good question, because it raises some issues. So actually what happened, okay, so first of all, that is one of the key points of our setup, is actually having real end users.
Yeah.
Because I think we have plenty of labs around in the company, where basically the guys working on it are the only ones that use it. And of course you're happy with it and you think this is the best thing since sliced bread. So actually a very fundamental thing for us was actually to be able to recruit real end users that we don't know by first name. And as I said, we had one project which is still running with our sister organization here in Norway. And actually what they did was recruit students traveling abroad for a semester or 2 on their own Facebook pages. So Telenor Norway is the incumbent, and they have a lot of traffic on their Facebook pages. So in a fairly short time, they were able to recruit the few hundreds we needed, and we're happy to do so. And then, of course, they have a strong Norway, and they're very careful about that, not doing things that can harm the brand. So the way that we solved it was they were running the project towards these users, and they've also been very careful about telling them what they got into. All right.
Yeah, no, that's clear.
That worked out quite well, actually. But there has been, of course, many different discussions on how to be very experimental. But then experimental means also that some of these things will be a little bit brittle.
Yeah.
And then how do you handle that? So I think having very informed users and communicating with them often and have them understand what they're getting into is very important.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, and using online tools to recruit those either tech savvy or early adopters that understand that things can break, not work, and are there and want to provide feedback. I've seen in a number of services. Wire is a good example, where they have what's called the telco mafia, which is basically a whole host of old school telco guys in a group that whinge at them about the product, and you need to edit, you need to do this, you need to do that. But it provides that early market feedback to help craft a product that works. And it's both getting those early adopters through online mechanisms, and then letting viral, basically sort of people introducing people to get that early product. And then it becomes far more commercial in a way, because once you've got a viable product, then it's how much do you spend on online marketing to raise awareness. It's as simple as that then. So that's great advice. Now, question 7, how do you charge for the services? Ooh. Are you there, Werner? We seem to have lost you. No, we seem to have dropped. He's just paused there. So let me just see if we can get him back. This is the first time. Yep, he's just dropped. Let me see if he's... There you go. He's coming back in.
Yeah, hi there.
Yay, we recovered. So the question I was asking is, how do you charge for the services?
Yeah, that's what I didn't want to answer, so I just dropped the line. No, actually in this first user group, actually the payment has been their patience and time and willingness to actually be bugged by us, all right?
Yeah, yeah.
So initially they have not paid in money, but they have been paying in actually using a service which has been almost ready, and also be willing to give us feedback and respond to a lot of questionnaires and have deep interviews on particular issues and so on. So that's the way they pay for the service in this phase.
Gotcha. Cool. And then moving forward, do you have your own billing platform? Will you use just like Swipe, or or will you try to integrate into a more traditional billing platform?
Yeah, that's still to be decided.
Understood.
So our focus has been on other parts of the system.
Yeah.
But I think more importantly than actually getting paid for the service is to gauge the willingness to pay.
Yes.
Because everyone likes free pizza. Doesn't mean that it's fantastic. So yeah. I think you need to be able to, for real, test the willingness to pay if that's what you intend to do in the end.
Yeah, yeah, because we have to make money.
Full BSS stack, because that's not where our focus is at the moment.
Gotcha. Understood. Understood. Now, one question, this came up a couple of times, is how do you make decisions on which services to experiment with? And what's the average time from making a decision to getting it in front of customers to play with? Or users, I should say, to play with.
I wish I could say days. Well, I think it's a mix. So this one project was actually a request from our sister organization. They were actually doing testing on PowerPoint basis. Yeah. And they said, well, maybe we could try it for real. Okay. So they asked us for some help, and we were able to do that. Yeah. And that was a quite big effort. So that took months actually to get that live. Gotcha. But then we have other experiments that we've been doing lately, and that has been taking days. So we have one of the team which is very interested in machine learning. So we've been trying to test out a service which is quite promising. We don't know, which is basically we basically wiretap my calls, and in real time we do speech to text. And he was able to put this up in a couple of days and expose it. So this is something we can show to real people as their interest on. So it depends very much, of course, on what's the service like. But this is not a trivial service to do. But because we have people that has built the platform are able to change it, it can be a matter of days to just get the first test going, actually. Exactly, because I think one of the things that, as an industry, we've done experiments like this over decades, where we've done speech to text, near real speech to text, but it's always been expensive to implement and been a very rarefied skill. Today, almost anybody can enable it, and the resources are relatively cheap. So we're really getting to that, I still refer to it as the democratization of telecoms, where anybody can play with it. And I think what you're highlighting is making that within the Telenor group, an experimental unit that can take advantage of this democratization to, as you say, in days, just play, get stuff out and see what sticks. And then craft, because from that, machine learning, that could go in a number of directions. It could go in a business direction for particular segments. It could go in the consumer angle. And of course, then you have the issue around getting people to pay. But, it could be ad supported, or, there could be ways in which you can monetize it differently from just charging. So that's great advice. Now, another question is, how do you make decisions on when to stop experimenting and cancel or launch a service? I mean, Google here is the archetype in terms of just dropping stuff when it's not working. Yeah, and that is actually a difficult skill. Yeah. because it's easy to fall in love with what you have spent time on, and you try, you start loving it yourself. So actually, we've been trying a few things, and one thing has been time boxing. So regardless of the result, you say we will spend this amount of time on this thing, and after that there will be a completely new decision, regardless. But I'm not saying it's super easy, but I think that's one way of doing it. And of course, once you have really end users and getting feedback on it, then it's easier to be a little bit honest if the service is really worthwhile or not. So we have had experiments that we thought that was great service, great thing, and it turns out that the users didn't think the same. Okay, then we know that either we need to twist it completely or we stop it. So
that's a good
again, having the real end users on the line is actually is a key to making the right decisions.
Exactly, yeah, because they're brutal. I mean, they say exactly what they think, and I think that time boxing, so you make a decision. And you drop it. It's not working, it's not engaging, you drop it. But one of the things is there's always somebody in the organization that's just so in love, and they say, look, in your playtime, play with it. Go away and play with it. If you can come back with something basically that's can address the issues we had, then maybe we'll do it again. But I agree. It's doing that time boxing so you avoid wasting effort on something that just never really takes off. So that's good. Now, what's the relative cost of development with of your experimental network versus doing stuff the traditional way?
Okay, so that's almost like I wrote a question myself to my sponsors. So so the response to that should of course be a fraction of the time. All right. So if you're not able to deliver on that fractional cost and time, then we're doing something wrong or should not do it anymore. Yeah. So if we start having issues with that, then we need to change something or kill the project or whatever. Yeah. So unless we are able to do this fairly quickly compared to the alternative, then we have a difficult time. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, T-Mobile, so we'll have next week, actually, we'll have Gregors and Martina from T-Mobile, and they have a similar, it's sort of experimental in a way, but it's working with local partners rather than traditional vendors, and they claim a 2.5 to 1 saving. So they've provided a reasonable saving. So just to say, there are numbers out there, and hopefully we'll be able to get some numbers out of you at some time.
No, but it should be radical difference. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
We're putting up a unit here, which is kind of very different from the classic setup. Yeah. Our reason d'etre is actually being able to do this much quicker. Yeah. And then we can also maybe sometimes cut some corners just to get to the real meat of the service or whatever, to get the answers that we want. And then the question how to roll it out in the bigger picture.
Exactly. And then just wrapping up on the questions, what new services are you working on?
I mentioned this thing about machine learning.
Which is interesting.
That is getting quite a lot of traction these days. And as you said, by now combining the classic telco services with some of these services available as a service on the internet, we can test these things in a number of days rather than half a year or a year. Yeah. Machine learning is an area that is interesting. And then I think we have been hoping to expose some of these APIs that we are building internally to other people. So hopefully we could show up at some TAD hack with some good APIs where other people could, for instance, try out, speech to text on their own media streams, for instance, from the GSM phone. That would be cool to let people test that out. So that, I think, are two main areas that has our attention at the moment.
And I agree. Taking the services and some of the primitives that you're creating, exposing it through simple APIs that people can come and just play with it and do stuff that you would never possibly have thought of. And then that feeds back in. And exactly, that's what TAD Hack's all about. So hopefully, TAD Hack Global in October, we can get some of your APIs there.
We'd love to be there with some great APIs for people to test. So that would be good.
Perfect. Well, this is excellent, Werner. Again, thanks for your time. This was a great Q&A, and best of luck in building this experimental telco.
Okay, see you in October.
Thanks. Bye-bye.